Welcome to this episode of Talking Transformation, an Australian Transformation and Turnaround Association initiative. We hope you enjoy the varied conversations and experiences shared by our industry transformation and turnaround leaders. If you'd like to know more about AusTTA, you can visit our website at austtta.org. I'm the series host, Jackie O'Dowd. Today I'm talking with Julie Adams, who is the Managing Director of Chemo Home and has worked in the haematology and oncology areas of health for over 20 years. Julie graduated with a Bachelor of Pharmacy and completed a postgraduate diploma in hospital pharmacy. But that wasn't enough. Following on from that was board certification in oncology pharmacy in the United States. And with her business, Julie's founded Chemo Home, which we're going to talk about today. So Julie, we're talking transformation.
Thank you very much, Jackie. It's a pleasure to be on the show.
So one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you today was to talk through your transition from what was really hospital-based pharmacy for haematology oncology to home-based treatments. And that wouldn't have been an easy transition. And what you're doing has pretty much transformed the choices that people make for treatment. So tell us about some of the challenges you had to face when you first started.
It's really interesting, isn't it, Jackie? It's sometimes really easy to see things as like overnight successes, but you realise looking back how many steps it took to get to where you've got to. So, I mean, obviously part of this was already what I did in the hospital sector. And many years ago, when I was really only just a very young pharmacist, I recognised that people could spend really long periods of time in hospital, particularly back then if they had blood cancers. They'd be in hospital for months. And I just knew that there had to be a better way of doing it. Didn't quite know what it was back then, didn't know quite how to harness that sort of thought, but just thought this didn't seem right. And then bits of information started to become available, which showed that people actually were sicker and got infections and stayed in hospital longer. The more they stayed in hospital, it was kind of like this self-propelling illness. And that kind of coincided with my dad being treated in hospital as well. And at the time, this was I'm going to say now 27 years ago, when no such thing as home-based treatments even existed. And he needed to have antibiotics at home for a chest infection. And he was an unwell man, and it was going to, as it turned out, be his last Christmas with us. And so I kind of learnt how to do it from my own nursing staff myself. And that's what we did. We took him home for Christmas and I gave him his antibiotics. And that kind of sparked the personal quest and the desire, if you like, the passion for it. And then my intellectual part said, this has got to be a better way. We've got to be able to do this better than what we're currently doing it. And they kind of like coincided. And over many years, I just looked at how this could be done. And I did it in the government sector for a number of years. And then myself and my business partner, Lorna Cook, took the great leap of remortgaging our houses, resigning from our jobs and starting Chemo Home.
And thank God you did, because I think what you've done has pretty much transformed the care sector. It's a great model, and health could actually learn a lot. I'm going to call now public health or state health could learn a lot from what you've done and the model that you've deployed.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. I think one of the things is that our health system is, this is no surprise to any of us, I guess, but our health system is built on wellness, not wellness. And it's built around hospitals and health services, not on people maintaining good qualities of life, not on people maintaining wellness whilst they've got a specific condition. And it's changing. I mean, everyone within the system, it's not just me, but it's lots of people within the system are changing the way things are done. But it does take time to do that. It's not an overnight transition. And along the way, as I think, just going back to your previous question about what are some of the roadblocks or challenges, is that essentially to change a system, you are up against a system. And that system is incredibly strong and powerful at maintaining status quo. So changing to something different for them is potentially more work, potentially more time. It's definitely more human resources to change a system than to keep on status quo, even if the end result is better management. There's a process in the middle, which is not. and you have to be prepared to do that work. And we live in challenging times of limited resources and time, and it's hard sometimes for people to see outside the square of what they currently do, and how that might be affected to create this sort of change.
And I think now, given that the health sector is under such enormous pressure with COVID, I mean, it's under pressure at the best of times anyway because of funding, resourcing. But now with the additional COVID things as well, what you're doing is, just amazing stuff. And it's giving people better options for treatment, and they can still stay in that care environment, that service environment, and not say, well, go away for 3 months.
Absolutely.
We're too busy to cope.
Yeah, and you're right. We have expanded. I think we looked at it from this time 2 years ago. We're 4 times as large. So we have scaled up very rapidly and very fast. We have at different times worked with different other providers to collaborate with them and move patients from a day unit to our service. Almost overnight, we've moved whole groups of patients out of the hospital sector to help try and limit their risk from COVID. And we've done that really successfully. So I think that during COVID, it's been kind of the time for us to show how agile we are and how important it is to be agile in this type of environment.
So tell us a little bit about what that agility looked like. What were the things that you had to think about, have in place and do to get that scale?
Wow, it's really interesting. I mean, I think we were always an agile organisation, but COVID, like every health service, it really threw us some curveballs. So clearly one of the things about being agile in a home-based delivery market, particularly something as nuanced and niche as what we did, with a whole lot of regulation and safety around it as well, was that we had to have amazing IT, and IT that was built for the point of care, so that everything a nurse was doing within the home was fully supported by a back end that made that as safe as possible, and that they were feeding information back into the system as timely as possible. And that allowed us to manage the volume increase much, as I'm going to say, more safely than if we didn't have that in place. We also had really great technology to help support communication between our team, which is a really, really important thing, particularly when you're dealing a lot with the care of patients, and the nursing team need to be able to talk to each other, talk to coordinators, talk to the pharmacy team, and we had all that built in. So all the IT infrastructure that was needed, we already had existing and sitting there, and we're deploying it prior to COVID. Once COVID hit, it just got the most amazing workout ever. And I think the thing I'm most proud of is that that nothing broke. It was stretched to capacity, but nothing broke. And then the second part of that is that during that expansion, managing some of the things that came up from COVID, such as every man and his dog wanted a tablet at home for their child to do homeschooling on. So we now couldn't buy the electronic gadgets we needed for our nursing team. One of the upsides maybe of it was that because no one was traveling, hire companies couldn't hire a car for love nor money. And we suddenly had a huge increase in fleet that we needed. So we did a deal with a hire company to use some of their hire vehicles. So there were some really interesting things that we had to be really agile about how we thought about how do we get tablets, how do we buy things in advance, how do we maintain our consumables and protective equipment for our nursing team, which up until that point, you were very much buying only 2 weeks at a time, because you try and keep your cash flow going well and not expending great volumes of money on consumables that sit there for months and months. Of course, now we had to do the opposite. We had to have lots of stock there ready and waiting, because we couldn't rely on everything coming from China the way we could previously. So we had to change the way we purchased. We had to change the way we thought about IT, and we had to change the way we thought about our fleet. And as I said, I'm really proud of how we did that and thought on our feet and sort of countered these problems with, I don't think any disaster management plan that we'd written beforehand ever would have put in do a deal with a hire company for their fleet that they're no longer using because no one's traveling, because you're going to have a sudden increase in need for fleet vehicles. So, but it was a great collaboration.
Yeah, but that's one of the great things about your team and what you've done. Like you said, you've always been agile and you've always been thinking outside the square as for how things get done and what you can do. But one of the things that has always fascinated me about Chemo at Home is your you are a services and people-centric business, but you've got two elements to that, don't you? You have we've got to keep the business going, but we also have to do the service provision as well. So the tension between those two things becomes really interesting, and good for you that you've got through this all, and and you're still servicing your patients, which is fantastic.
And it is always, I think every business has to work out what part is business and what part is service, and how the two come together. For us, it's the service is always at the forefront of our mind. It's our vision is to provide a better patient experience. That is absolutely categoric. But at the same time, you can't do that if you don't have a financially sustainable business model. The two have to go hand in hand. And I think that's where we have done well, in as much as that we have been able to harness both those sides. And to deliver great service, you have to have a great team. There is nothing you do without a team that is all pulling in the same direction. And I think that kind of is the part that links the service delivery and the business together. The business can only be efficient if you have a great team. The service delivery can only be of high quality if you've got a great team. And so that's the part that links both of those together.
So what are some of the things that you think make up that great team? What are some of the characteristics of it?
Well, for us, we really work strongly on our culture in our team. So we have a very strong emphasis on how we develop our people within our systems. We use a particular platform to capture information from our people, and that's both reflected in numbers. Like, we actually measure their happiness index to find out how engaged and connected and how much contribution, what they value in their contribution. And we can actually rate how happy they are, and we can also identify who's not happy. But also, too, we capture the words that they use to describe how they're going, and we do it over a number of different spheres of their life. And we really, truly believe that people bring their whole selves to work. So if there's a problem at home, it'll show up at work. If there's a problem at work, it'll show up at home, so that we are responsible for helping our people to live a really wholehearted life. And so we use that as our platform to measure how well our people are going. But we also, too, that whole agility can't be done unless you have people who are internally motivated. So for us, this starts at recruitment. And we measure this at recruitment when we're interviewing for people. So we want people who want to work autonomously. Autonomously is a hugely important criteria for us. It's like, we've got 80 people now. We can have 2 people at the top steering the ship. But if the other 78 people underneath are only just following our orders, we're only as good as myself and my business partner, Lorna. We want 80 people like us, all doing what is needed to change systems to make them better. And I think we do really well at doing that. So we want people who work autonomously. We want to know that they appreciate and identify with our purpose and are all going to be working in the same way to get to that end goal. And that doesn't matter whether you're the person who's doing the stores and unpacking the boxes, cleaning the offices, doing our IT, the pharmacists who set up all the protocols, or the nurses who actually go out to the home to deliver them. Their job is all to make the patient experience better. If any of those links fail, we all fail. And so everybody has that drilled into them and understands that. So that autonomy, that working for that purpose. And for the last thing, we think it's really important that people are always striving to be better and striving to achieve more than what they currently are. And so we harness all those 3 elements of autonomy and mastery and purpose, and we put it within a culture system that helps them to thrive. If they're thriving, it helps us to identify them and help to address that. So And I think that has just been an amazing feat over the course of the last few years to do that.
I think one of the amazing things that you just mentioned is the sort of like the use of technology for driving what I would put in the frame of inclusion, asking people how they feel, what they think, how things can be improved. Do you make a conscious effort for inclusion?
Absolutely, absolutely. So, one of the things that we do within our teams is send out engagement surveys, and one of the things that we measure when we're measuring these variables, and we do this every 4 months with our team. We measure these variables with each of our team members individually. Is that we ask them, do they feel they can speak up? Are they working in a trusted environment where what they say and what they bring forward is welcomed and not ridiculed? Do they feel that they're heard when they bring things up? And so, you can strive all you like for inclusion, but if people don't feel safe, psychologically safe to mention things, they won't do it. You can say you're inclusive, but if people can't speak up, they won't do it. If people think when they speak up that they're not heard, they'll stop doing it. And so those things, as I said, that we measure every 4 months with every individual person that we work with, and then measure within teams of our people at intervals as well, shows us if we're achieving that, and if we're not, what we need to do to fix it.
Was there any rationale to the 4 months, the measurement of 4 months, rather than, say, doing it every 6 months or every year?
That's a really, really good question, Jackie. And I'm not sure there's a huge rationale, but 4 months is a long time. And 4 months over the last 2 years has seemed like a really long time.
Really long time.
And I'm not sure that, I can't say there's anything empirical that I can pull out, but, I can say that people have had parents and grandparents die within 4 months. They've had given birth within 4 months. COVID changed our life within about 3 months. There is so much that can change within that time that it feels to us like the right cadence of measuring these things. But it may be at a time when life is slightly different. We might stretch it out to 6 months. That might be the case. But at the moment, 4 months feels right to us.
But I don't think we'll ever go back to old let's say 2019 ways of working and living and being, and the expectation now is so much higher. And I think, given, like we talked about before, the pressures on the health system, I think there has to be more of this, I'm going to say, home-based care or personalised care. And what, in the area that you're in, people that are facing the types of treatments that you do, it's a daunting thing and a daunting time for them. And so everything you're putting into your experience is pretty much, I'd say in some cases, the complete opposite of what's happening in that public system. So how do we get, that move from people's expectation of what's in that public system to what's already now in the private system, although it's more of a hybrid space? How do we change that expectation now so we don't go back to 2019, but we don't stay where we are?
It's a fabulous question. And I think COVID has really changed that a lot. So a lot of the things that we had as roadblocks, say 2 or 3 years ago, the things that people would say to us about not being able to do treatment in the home safely, not being able to do it at scale, it being inefficient, all these things that they would put up to us, the funding wasn't there for it, that they put up to us as being roadblocks, actually all of a sudden came crashing down when the bigger risk came along, which was COVID. And so I think that in part has changed the shape of the way people think. What I think it hasn't done is it hasn't taught people, they don't yet have the knowledge on how to change the systems for the better. They might want people to have more patient-centric care, but they really don't know how to deliver a home-based service. Hospitals aren't set up for it. And so for them, they have to collaborate with external stakeholders to be able to do it. And that external stakeholder place within health changes with politics, changes with CEOs of hospitals and people's own personal agendas. And so kind of the patient-centric view, the home delivery view, how to do that best economically, human resource efficiently, and financially sustainably, is kind of lost within the politics of the bigger institutions, I feel. And I think that's the part, that's probably the bit that needs to be unpicked more now, is who are these people? What are their thoughts? And why are they not collaborating with service providers which have clearly demonstrated expertise and skills in this area and a best situated to deliver an efficient service? And if we're not collaborating them, why aren't we? You know, how can, if we think we can do this better, how can we do it better? And, you know, look at it from that perspective, because I think that's where it's being lost.
If you look at what the state governments are all doing with the electronic medical record, I mean, you know, you would think that pulling patient data into one space, a central repository for everyone to use to start the journey for the patient, regardless of how that journey evolves, but just trying to get one thing in place, the amount of money that's been spent on that medical record systems and the disparities across what the different states are doing and how they're doing it. Does that impact you at all?
It does. There's lots of disconnect within the health service. You know, every pathology provider uses a different platform. Every pharmacy or pharmacy service within hospitals and the private sector is all built differently and has different information. And I think My Health Record is supposed to help to alleviate some of that, but it's not like we're all working on the same platform. It's not like all the information is being fed into the same platform. So, you know, the interoperability of different electronic health records, where that information is kept, really does become quite a difficult thing to navigate. And in some ways, I feel that the issues around privacy are working directly in opposition to good healthcare. Because, you know, in many cases, the information that healthcare providers need to see, you know, if a patient comes to us, but they're also had surgery in a private hospital or a public hospital, or they've had radiotherapy, or they've had, you know, they've seen a doctor in their own rooms privately, we can't see any of that information. We don't know what's been said in there or been done in there. Likewise, they can't see our information. And there's ways around that. There's communication things you can put in place to assist that and provide that, but they're all workarounds for what is essentially a pretty flawed base grade system. And going forward, as you say, the more devolved healthcare becomes, so the more that we push out to the community, the more that we want to provide patient-centric care, which is then really individualized to what patients need, whether that be a home-based service or an allied health service, whatever that is, the more devolved we make it, the less those systems talk to each other. And that becomes a issue that we haven't yet resolved.
And I don't think it's one that's going to be resolved quickly or easily. Having had some experience with some, let's say, hospital-based systems architectures, you know, they are very fragmented. Like you said, the interoperability is just not there. But if we're going to get this as this home-based care as the primary model, there's got to be some fundamental building blocks put in place.
I absolutely agree. And as I said, I think from a communication point of view, we work very well with all the people that we provide services to, both the patients and our other stakeholders like the clinicians in the hospitals. But it's often the opposite way around that it doesn't work. So we might provide information to doctors and hospitals, but the hospitals hardly ever provide us information. You know, they're just not built to devolve information in that way. They're all specific one-on-one requests to get anything out of them. And so, you know, it's going to be a work in progress. And as I said, I sometimes think our focus on privacy is in direct both contradiction to and working against good healthcare for people.
And I think that whole privacy thing is a much broader social question as well. You know, so many people are so open to putting their lives up onto social media platforms, and yet the health system is a closed system as far as information goes, whereas I think, good governance frameworks can resolve most of that, and I think at the end of the day, it's the patient's authority that counts as to how their information is shared.
And I think also too, we grossly underestimate what we think people think we already know. So if we asked our patients, I know because they say to us on different occasions that they think that we can see their pathology results. They think that we can see what's dispensed at their local pharmacy. They think we have access to the hospital sector systems and information. They already think that is happening, that we're all talking and this is all linked in the background. The fact that it's not blows their mind most of the time because they can't understand how we all work in these little silos. But so they think it's already happening and it's not. So in fact, I feel sometimes that it's not the privacy that's the issue. It's people's understanding of how little things are linked and what that effect is on their overall outcomes. That's important.
But as you said, it needs a much broader conversation because there are so many stakeholders in this, from the legislators, the regulators, the service deliveries, the hospitals themselves, the health departments, and everybody else in that allied health space. It's a large stakeholder group to bring together, but it needs to be done, I'd say, sooner rather than later.
Yeah. And one of the things we set up very early when we do our consents for patients, so, obviously, as soon as a patient comes to us, we consent them for treatment. But one of the things that we do is that we make them think about this, because one of the questions that they consent to is that we will give information to and receive information from other health service providers in the course of delivering their care for the safety of their care. And I think that that's a really important thing to address with people so that they know that that's happening in the background. And that's the thing. I think most people actually expect it to happen. But until you write it down, they probably don't realise that for the most part, it doesn't happen. So I think encouraging them to think about that up front is really important.
Just go into the thought process, the thought bubble of, if health actually did work through a data availability and an interoperability model, just imagine the gains that could be made in just doing that one thing and doing it really, really well.
Yeah, it would be amazing. It would be amazing. But, I'm not going to hold my breath too, much for that one.
Well, we always say transformation is a journey, don't we? It's not an event. In your space, I'm fascinated by the model, the success of the model. You've pulled together great teams and great ways of being and doing. What we talked about the benefits for some of the patients, like lower infection rates and all of the clinical things. But what about some of the mental aspects that people go through when they're going through those treatments?
It's amazing. I mean, we do a patient experience survey every month for people who have been treated in the month prior. And the comments we get through consistently support what we're just talking about now, Jackie. So the differences it makes on the patients not going into hospital, the day they lose out of their lives, traveling into hospital, sitting there for most of the day, having a treatment and coming home again, the difference it makes on their family's life. Most people take a carer or a support person with them who either drives them there or takes them to their treatment. So they lose a day as well. That person might be losing a day of work, a day of childcare, or some other activity that they're involved in. So it has very real financial implications for patients of them and their family losing income, as well as spending money on travel and parking and all those other things. All that weighs really heavily on people's minds. One of the things that we know from our own data is that there is a range of people who will say no to treatment because they don't want to be a burden on their family. And that's just heartbreaking. There are people who will stop treatment early because they know that what they're doing going into the hospital is burdensome to their loved ones. Again, we know that for some of our treatments, patients stay on treatment twice as long as when they go to a hospital. And one of the suppositions around that is that they don't want to be a burden on their family, or they know what they're doing is burdening their families. So, those psychological things that play out in people's lives, which limit their the good outcomes they could get from treatment because they don't want to be a burden. But also too, the fact that in their own home, they're sitting in their own environment, in their own lounge chairs. One of the best things I think patients will say is that they have their pets around them. So, you know, their dogs, their cats, sometimes even birds. But they have to leave the room at certain points in time when we're doing specific procedures like putting in the cannula and the like to make sure that everything's clean and sterile when those procedures are happening. But once everything's up and running, animals can come back into the room, and that is so comforting for most people to have their pets around. For people with young children, you know, one of our greatest advocates now was a lady who about 6 or 7 years ago had a 6-week-old baby when she was diagnosed with breast cancer. And she had the first 2 treatments in hospital, carting a 6-week-old child baby into hospital to sit next to her while she was having her treatment. And then she went on to have the rest of her treatment at home with her son now just sleeping in the bassinet next to her as she had her care delivered. That boy's now like 6 years old and he's a beautiful child. But for her, the difference it made, not only for her own mental health, but for almost the trauma it prevented her child from experiencing by being dragged backwards and forwards to hospital was immense. And it's things like that when you hear about children who now are able to be a part of their parents' treatment journey rather than being isolated and kept out of the hospital environment because of it's a hospital. The ability to have pets there, the change it makes in the financial resources they have available to them and their carers have available to them, it changes their lives. And that's what we most commonly hear is having treatment at home has changed my life. And when you hear that, it's hard not to get a bit teary about how much of a difference it can make to people.
That it can make. It is, it's amazing. It really is amazing. And having had a couple of family members who have been through the hospital system for chemo treatments, all of the things that you've mentioned were factors. You know, there were questions about, is this the right thing to do? I'm going to be a burden on everyone. There's enormous cost in this for everyone as well. But you tend to push that all aside. But then when you get into those systems, you just think how fragile the actual health system is itself, let alone the fragility of the patient. So where do you think these new models for care are going to go? Are we going to see them evolve and grow and be supported going forward? Or do you think as people try to enforce the old normal, the 2019 way of working, are they going to try and get in the way of making this a reality in more spaces?
That's another great question, Jackie. I think really the federal government is helping to drive some of this. You know, they have put in place working parties to look at how to transform these areas, including different models of care. They have in part changed some of the funding arrangements to have it possible to have treatment at home. So, I mean, our service could never have started if the 2011 changes to the Private Health Insurance Act hadn't been implemented, because there would be no way to be able to fund an at-home service like ours. It would have come out of someone's ancillary cover, which never, like for physio and the like, and never would have worked. So the fact that they've made some of these changes, they're not always the perfect changes, and they're not always, sometimes they've changed one part of a system without knowing that 2 other parts need to be changed as well for it to actually work. But I feel that they're moving in the right direction. And I feel that people really want to have something which treats them like a person, not a number, that treats them holistically. They are not just a disease which needs a chemical put into them, that they are complex creatures with complex lives, and that needs to be taken into account. I think that COVID has also made people think about things in a different way. And I don't just mean from a risk point of view, and I don't want to go into the whole vaccination thing, but I think that everything about the way that information is provided, everything about the way a person considers their own healthcare and what risks they're willing to accept and how they want to be heard has changed. That whole conversation has really changed. And I don't think there is any way to go back. I think people have found voices that they didn't have before, and they're using them. And I don't think that's going away.
No, I wholeheartedly agree. So just before we finish, one question that's bubbling away in the back of my mind is, given where you started and the challenges you've faced, was there ever a point, even though you've had this the grand vision for the service delivery at home, was there ever a point at which you thought this is all too hard and you nearly gave up?
Once or twice, and not from a lack of passion or a lack of desire. But there were times when financially we were pushed to the wall, and we maybe not so much that we didn't want to go on, but that we thought we couldn't go on, that we could see no way to resolve the issues that we had. And that's really largely about how poorly funded new service delivery models are, how poorly funded women's startups are, and the availability of funding for profit, for purpose entities. There is money available for not-for-profits. I think male owned companies have a greater investment opportunity, but some of those things which were systemic within the funding systems worked against us for a number of years. And there were, as I said, there were times that we were pushed to that point, but luckily we've got amazing amount of perseverance and determination, and I think it also comes into the fact that it's really important to have a business partner. Business partners are critical. It's really unusual for both of you to be in a bad headspace about the potential viability of going on. At the same time, you pull each other along in those ways. And we are humans like everyone else. There are things that go wrong in our personal lives too, that sometimes take your focus away from work. And you need that help. I'm not sure how anyone transforms an area, particularly as big as this, without having a business partner as their most supportive person in their life, basically.
Yeah. Well, I think sometimes you spend just as much time as them as you do with your family, don't you?
Yes, sometimes more.
Yeah, sometimes more. I reckon the point that you've raised about the funding for profit, for purpose, is great. I think that needs a little bit more exploration. Once again, I just thank you for talking with us today. It's been absolutely fantastic. I think you've given us great insight into what you're doing and how you're doing. I love the happiness factor that you measure.
Thank you.
I love the fact that you do it on a regular basis. And I look forward to sitting back and watching how you progress and take on the next part of the chemo at home journey.
Thank you so much, Jackie, and thank you for talking with me.